Hey there, everyone. Hello, it's Christy, and welcome to a previously unannounced and very recently scheduled hangout on the U.S. political scene, the GOP race, the Democratic Party, and maybe if we have time, we'll talk about VP picks. But I'm here with the person that I feel almost like we're co-hosts at this point. It's Will Fox. Welcome back to the channel.
Hey everybody, good to be back. Thanks for having me again, Christy.
Yes, I mean, I love that this has turned into like a regular thing. In fact, after the election, I think I'm going to miss you. We're going to have to like find things happening in Congress just to make sure we touch base a couple times a year, before the 2018 races, obviously.
Right. I have a great website that tracks international elections, so we could just we could pick out the interesting, like, oh, let's talk about Argentina this week.
That would be really awesome. All right, well, let's talk about that in the future. We have a lot to get through, though, between now and November, so we're going to be, I'm sure, hanging out on a pretty monthly basis between now and then. But the headline for this video, we put the teaser up, which is, will the GOP establishment steal the nomination from Donald Trump? So maybe before we talk about where the race is heading, we should have a bit of a catch up as to where things are. And I'm just going to throw it back to you, Will, because I don't want to dominate the conversation. Do you want to give a little state of the art or state of play with the GOP race now? And I can also add some stuff about Wisconsin as color commentary. So.
Oh yeah, of course. So for anyone who's not up to date, if you're watching, I'm sure you are, the race for the Republican nomination has become 10 times more interesting in the last 3 days, as if it couldn't get more interesting. The reason is because Donald Trump was dominating, way ahead in delegates, and looking like he had a pretty decent path, a pretty good chance of getting 1237, the magic number to get the nomination at the convention. But Wisconsin was just a few days ago. The state of Wisconsin voted. Ted Cruz won, also taking a majority of those delegates. And that throws the whole thing into a bit more of a 50-50 thing. Maybe Donald Trump can still perform really well in the next states that come and get the 37 number, get the nomination on the first ballot, but it's looking more and more and more and more like there is going to be a serious challenge at the convention. That's the big question, the big discussion, so to speak, about this little show we're about to put on.
Yeah, so unpacking the Wisconsin numbers, and I am a Wisconsin native, although I've not lived there for a long time, but I still have family that are back there. And obviously I know Dane County and the Milwaukee suburbs and the northern parts of the state, because as a former person who worked for the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates, I spent time in places like Antigo and places you've never heard of in Wisconsin.
Rural America is the best.
Yes, very, very rural. And so with that, I found really interesting reading the news reports coming out after the election was the turnout in Wisconsin. Because of the other stories, the turnout itself hasn't got much play in the media that I've seen. But the turnout was 1.1 million people voted in the 2016 Republican primary, highest turnout since I think 1972. And just as by way of comparison, I looked up how many people voted for Scott Walker in his recall election against Tom Barrett, whenever that was. You want to guess how many people voted for Scott Walker?
For Scott Walker, so not in total. 200,000.
No, it was 1.3 million.
I was off by 1 million. That's
okay.
Close enough.
You're either going to be really close or really far off, I guess. And if you guess one, then you know at least you can't make a mistake. You do clear, I picked one. That's how many. So,
it's like The Price is Right, you know.
There you go. Yes. $1.
Actually, it's the highest turnout. I think because you're doing great and your numbers are right on. The highest turnout year was 1980. It was the Reagan Revolution.
Okay, I guess I saw a headline might have been up. It might have been erroneous. So thank you for that on-air fact check. We do that here.
Dang, right here. No.
So yeah, basically 200,000 people more voted in the Republican defense of the governor there as voted in the entire primary. So to me, it really showed you the way that basically like all the Republicans in Wisconsin turned out for this election. And what was, I guess, surprising to me and surprising to other people that I've seen comment on it is the fact that it was a real example of tactical voting.
Yes.
And we've talked about voting tactically on this show before. I had kind of forgotten that, but yes, this whole really organized it was organized by the establishment. This is important. It wasn't evangelical Christians or people on the social right that were doing this. This was basically establishment Republicans in Wisconsin biting the bullet in order to stop Trump. And so I think one of the things that, if we have time and can unpack, is this idea of the establishment who are looking at the Republican Party in the long term versus Trump, who's looking at this election. And there are establishment people who've been in the party for years, maybe decades, who are basically doing the whole I'd rather lose with Cruz.
Yeah.
Because then we keep the party. And the motivations of that faction, I think, is what you see represented in Wisconsin, where they do have a very strong Republican Party. The Republicans control the legislative and executive branches. They're taking over the court branch as well. And so they're very organized. And in this case, it is quite unusual to see a Republican Party. Usually when you go to the states, they're talking about demographics, the evangelical demographic, and the people who have blue collar worker kind of demographic. But really there, it was all about sort of the Republican identity for that chunk of the Wisconsin electorate and making that tactical decision, which I think is pretty phenomenal.
Did you notice the difference between the suburbs and the rural areas and how they voted?
Yeah, the map I saw was that it was Trump all north and then it was Cruz all south.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also interesting to go on what you said earlier about people strategizing and being strategic. I also have questions about the motives of the people that are going and pushing people to vote, say, I'd rather lose with Cruz, so to speak. And I wonder how many of those people only see Ted Cruz as a way to a contested convention and don't actually plan on advocating for him once it's clear that Trump won't get to 1237.
Oh yeah, man.
Ted Cruz really isn't, like, if you look at the numbers, Ted Cruz really isn't that much better. And if you listen to Clinton advocates like David Axelrod, a lot of them are saying they'd rather go against Cruz because it's a lot more like old school playbook of, oh, we got a Southern conservative Christian here. Let's we know what to do. So I wonder what the motives are behind some of the establishment people pushing this Cruz narrative now.
Oh yeah, this is straight out of Westeros.
Yeah.
I actually have diagrammed out the various factions' path to the nomination and their tactics.
It's funny. But the real question is, if the people do have that motivation, which I'm sure some of them do, they say we're gonna prop Cruz up and then tear him down as soon as we don't need him anymore. Where are they going when that's finished? Like, what do they think their end game is? That they just
since you brought up my diagram, I'm just gonna we'll go by order, right? So you can't really see this, but imagine the first person up that I think we could talk about in terms of his strategy, and I'll maybe give out this narrative, and then you can jump in and tell me your reactions because I think you'll probably agree, but maybe you'll want to tweak it. Is Trump himself, and of course his ultimate goal is to get a majority so that he can get it on the first ballot, and then his second order preference is to basically get as close as possible so he can make the case that if he has a plurality but he has more than anyone else, that's basically the same as getting a majority. So his notion there is to get it either through direct legitimacy or implied legitimacy. Whereas with Cruz, obviously, is running now against Trump on the assumption that if they can get to a contested convention, that after the first round, where the various bound delegates will be free to vote as they choose, the work he's doing now to steal delegates away from Donald Trump, and doing it successfully and systematically to the point where it's, fascinating to watch and could potentially get really interesting as Trump maybe tries to counter this down the line if he can, and in order to basically become the replacement candidate. Whereas you're right, the establishment are just using Cruz right now as a way to keep Trump from getting an outright victory, to get them to a contested convention so they can put up their own candidate and shunt Cruz to the side. So all of this three-dimensional chess is happening, and it's amazing to watch. You see from the smile on my face.
Just to accent what you were saying, I have a poll. Everybody loves polls. And it was a poll of just general, Republican primary voters. And they asked if Trump gets a plurality, or if he gets the most delegates, is the way they framed it, but not the majority of delegates, should he get the nomination? And 51 or 52% people said, yes, he should. So I think there's also, you can't forget that there's a third party here, and that is the people who are going to vote for the Republicans in November. And they're saying, even though many of them aren't voting Trump, the majority of them aren't, there's still 52% of them still innately see the unfairness that goes along with taking that nomination away if he's the person that gets the most delegates. So that's another factor to think about.
There's a concept in political theory called democratic legitimacy.
Mhm.
And this is what basically sustains a government through making decisions as power changes between the parties that keeps people from armed rebellion. It's this idea that you are democratically elected and therefore you have a legitimacy to make these decisions on our behalf. And so the question then becomes, and that's at the state level though. I mean, that's at a government level where we're all citizens and we're all, by legally connected to this government, and we're ceding some authority over our lives and our freedoms to it. The whole Leviathan Hobbesian sort of basic observation, right? But with a political party, those obligations don't exist. A political party doesn't have to have democratic legitimacy. And that's something that we wanted to maybe set up for later if we get to the Superdelegates chat. By the way, just, Will, you keep your eye on the time because I'm having so much fun I won't. And I don't have any place to be, so.
Cool. It's not like you're strict. I have a pizza waiting for me and a Skype chat with my mother, so.
And these are important things in life.
When I'm not doing political analysis, I'm just chatting with my mom and eating pizzas.
So you're normal.
Can I? It's a perfect thing for what you were saying. Is that it's not just about it's not even a matter of democratic legitimacy. It's also a question of, even if the Republicans were trying to let me start over. The Republicans, even though they're not bound to that legitimacy, like you're saying, both parties want to present the image of democracy in their party. They've been wanting to do that since they reformed their rules in the 70s. But what doesn't match up, of course, is the way that Ted Cruz is now being able to manipulate the rules to get himself more delegates. I have a list here. I won't take long, but Louisiana is the best example. Donald Trump won Louisiana. Ted Cruz is going to come out with 15 more delegates than Donald Trump is out of Louisiana. He bent the rules at the county, state conventions. I mean, that's just how it works. In Colorado, there's some weird Colorado assemblies, and it looks like Ted Cruz is going to sneak out 6 extra delegates from there. North Dakota, apparently the party leaders choose the delegates in North Dakota, so they're not going to choose Trump. Iowa, Cruz won Iowa, but he's getting more delegates than he would have proportionally gotten if all things else being equal. And then one of the things that I talk about in my videos over at Political Junkie News, of course, is the actual Republican rules regarding bound delegates. I've looked through the party manifesto and the charter, and I just today was looking through the Texas party charter to see, is there some rule, where does it say that a bound delegate, someone who's been assigned, absolutely on the first ballot has to? I think they probably say some sort of pledge, but other than that, I can't find a punishment for that. So to bring it back around here, the rules are being bent in a million different ways by the party leaders, by Cruz, and if they're all breaking the rules, then who's to say that the individual delegates won't take the initiative themselves to break all the rules?
Yeah, and this actually does tie back to the concept of democratic legitimacy, because for the establishment, especially, this idea of, they're going to have this contested convention and they're going to put up Paul Ryan, their poster boy, their savior, their blue-eyed baby doll, and,
Six-pack abs.
Yeah, that guy, because he's done so well in the House that they're going to vault him into that position, and he's going to be a successful candidate, when the first thing that people are going to say is not a single person in any primary or caucus has ever voted for him. No. And this is why I don't think the establishment idea of getting rid of Cruz is very plausible. On the other hand, Trump is going to make a big deal if he feels he's been cheated. Now, if he feels he's been cheated and has been cheated, these are two different questions, because Trump has been lazy and cheap, and this is why he's in the problem situation he's in. But if the narrative is that Ted Cruz stole the nomination from Trump, that also is going to dog him throughout the campaign. Mm-hmm. And then Trump himself is the person that is going to blow up the party. So in terms of outcomes here, I don't see a really good one for the GOP in 2016.
Can I pose a wild theory that no one else has talked about? There's a news story that's been going around about the Alaska delegation, and the Alaska delegation was assigned during a portion of the race when Marco Rubio was still in the race, and Marco Rubio won a portion of those delegates. And when he dropped out of the race, according to the Alaska bylaws or whatever of their party, those delegates were reopened to the world. And so what Marco Rubio did, and it got a lot of attention, was that he wrote every single state where he had been given delegates and asked them not to release his delegates so that he could keep his 260 delegates. And I have a feeling that he, being someone who's not up for re-election in the Senate and has no like tangible job opportunities at this point, is looking for the VP slot. And I can see a Cruz-Rubio alliance to make that happen, as much as they hate each other. So I know that's a little bit different than what you were saying, but there's just so many different angles like coming in here. And
No, I think that's you heard it
crazy.
here first. Will's prediction. You heard it here first. You got it on tape.
I'm surprised actually, because it's a softball. Like the media talked about Marco Rubio wanting to keep his delegates, but nobody stated the obvious that like, why does he want to keep his delegates? They all said it was like a noble thing, like, oh, he's protecting the party. Like, oh, please. Like, no, he's not.
Looking out for number one.
He wants something, of course he does.
Yeah.
It's wild, and I can't wait for the convention. I know I say that every time we meet up, but I just can't wait. Like, and if they try to make me work my job, I'm going to tell them that I quit, because I've got to have this time available to watch.
Definitely. We talked about maybe doing some kind of live broadcast the night of, and I still want to make it happen. But if we set aside the whole the principles of democratic legitimacy and representation, and these processes should be based on the will of the people, let's just talk about how amazingly crafty and freaking smooth and backdoor Ted Cruz has been. He's been amazing with his organization. He's been amazing with his networking. He retains his staff after they move out of a state in order to maintain those connections and to build networks. And this is, Trump can complain, but he's just being out hustled at the end of the day.
I read a really interesting article in, I want to say it was the Atlantic and perhaps the Rolling Stone. It was a really long form piece about like inside the Trump campaign. And it was talking about the opening scene of the piece was like one of the Trump press secretaries, a young 28-year-old, and the actual campaign manager, like sitting at a poolside when the reporter shows up and just chilling. And the reporter goes on to describe in the story this lengthy description of the Trump campaign being this kind of tight-knit but way too small organization. That Trump is running his campaign in the same way he runs his business, where it's a tight-knit group, it's ruthless, and it's incredibly effective. But like you said, Ted Cruz has a national organization that maybe is loosey-goosey. He's got 13 different super PACs all working for him. And in politics, in a nationwide primary, that's the winning recipe, not the small ball, little tiny group of people in Trump Tower and a bunch of interns in a cement room, making phone calls. So that's a disadvantage for Trump, and I think it probably goes back to his own ego. He thought that he could just do this through his own sheer force of will and personality, and maybe he will, but there's a good chance now that he won't. And had he been more prepared and more willing to spend money, then he might not be in this situation right now.
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling from Trump that he thinks of delegates like poker chips. Mm-hmm. And when you get them, you just get them, and then you spend them later, and you turn them in. What he didn't realize was that, and I actually didn't too, really, I didn't realize the extent to which there is an entirely second campaign that needed to be run this time. And actually, the reason why we're having this underground campaign, which is not based on, sort of the will of the people, but just the will of a group of people who get to decide who goes to the convention, is because of the work that the Ron Paul people did in last time around before Romney, trying to undermine the process. So, on the one hand, yes, there's democracy and there's voting, but I'm also reminded of the Ken Burns baseball documentary, where he talked about King Kelly, who played, I think, in Massachusetts. Sorry for baseball fans if I'm getting this wrong. But a lot of the rules in baseball were invented because King Kelly would do things that people would go, that's not fair, that's not fair. Yeah. Like there was a pop-up fly and he was on the bench in the dugouts. And at that time, back in the day, before there was electricity and stuff, you would just change players by calling out, Kelly playing catcher, and then they'd swap people out. So sitting in the dugout, the pop-up comes, and he just stands up and goes, Kelly catching, as catcher for whatever his team was, and caught the ball. And that was like, no, you have to be on the field to play, and all these other stuff. So the thing is, you can't really blame Cruz for using all the opportunities available to him when you play for the Game of Thrones. You win or you die. You get the nomination or you go home a loser.
And the game was designed against Trump, so ironically, and it's now helping him. It was designed to help Mitt Romney. This is happening right now in New York, where the Bronx district, all like the 10% of Republicans that live in the Bronx, their delegate count, their value as far as the delegate race in New York goes, is just as valuable as the people who live in upstate New York, who are probably rich and voting Republican. And the same thing will be true in California when that primary rolls around in June. That those, like, I think I was just listening on the news today, and they were talking about how Nancy Pelosi's district in San Fran has the same weight as like Orange County, and these were rules designed to stop Trump or some sort of insurgent candidate. But ironically, because of the situation, they're well, first of all, they're in some ways helping Trump, and then in other times they're helping Cruz. Like all these really crazy 8-state rules, and like this was a checkered system that was designed to keep intruders out, and now the intruders are already inside the gates, and it's too late.
Very true.
More like the wall. Wait, let's change it. The wall has been breached by the White Walkers, all right, and now it's too late. They're already in, you know.
Yeah, and Trump is really, as you said, he's got a core of people. He's running this on the force of his personality, and he's never been willing to spend the money as to have that safety net, that backup of when the candidate falls. And another candidate who did pretty much the same thing was Marco Rubio. There's a great piece in Politico called The Hollow Campaign, where they talked about these sort of hot, young 40-something guys around Marco Rubio who decided all they really needed was him because he was basically he was like the Republican Jesus. And it was all about him, and he was the center of it, and they didn't have all of the field staff, the stuff that Cruz is doing, just door-to-door person, going to churches, getting those networks going, because they just thought through the force of his personality of being the Republican Obama, that would get him through. And as other people pointed out, the last things the Republicans wanted in 2016 was Barack Obama for them.
Another thing, I know I haven't seen that particular piece, but it just reminds me, I loved my college Republican friends, but a lot of them had this attitude of just kind of latching on to whatever candidate came around that was a Republican, and whoever was hot at the moment. And so I can totally see that, like that mindset not leaving ever. And then following people like Rick Perry in 2012 and getting shut down, and following Marco Rubio in 2016, shut down. Another thing to dovetail your point about Trump was that he also made the mistake of insulting places after he lost there, rather than being like, oh, I really appreciate the support of the people of Iowa. Well, better next time. If I win, I'll still come back. He was like, oh, Iowa, bunch of stupid farmers. Like, well, those people heard that. And so what was just a couple point like margin in the actual popular vote is now going to be a huge disparity in delegates. It might not directly be because of that, but he's not like winning hearts and minds in these states that voted against him.
Definitely. And I meant to make a point earlier, and then I forgot it, and then I remembered it again, about the GOP and the rules and the way that they're being used this time in unexpected ways. And it reminds me of the phrase that generals always fight the last war. And the RNC, with its debate schedule, with its focus on data stuff and not on outreach and connecting with communities, it's this archaic rules, or not really archaic, but let's say just like a Baroque rule system that allows for so many possible ways of being manipulated, that this is a problem of really their own devising.
It is. And as we talked about in our last hangout, I won't go into the numbers again, but the Electoral College wasn't looking so great for the Republicans anyway. Just a generic Republican against a generic Democrat was bound to lose. And so they needed something exceptional. They needed to bring in new voters, or they needed to have a super low turnout election, something, to change the formula. And now it's looking less and less like that's going to happen. I wanted to ask you a couple things. One, bold prediction. Do you see Donald Trump getting to 1237?
I just came out before our hangout. I watched Chuck Todd, and they ran their numbers. So it's not really a bold prediction. I'm just going to steal what he said because he did all the hard work. But it looks like because of Wisconsin now, what Donald Trump is going to come up short if he's, if you take a pretty optimistic path forward based on his previous performances. So basically, kind of ceteris paribus. Everything being equal, how is he going to end up, depending on how the states played out, whether or not they were more Cruz territory or caucuses or things like that. And they estimated he's going to be between 30 and 60 delegates short. That's the most sort of optimistic one. It could go down.
Damn.
So it looks like we are almost guaranteed now a contested convention.
It does. I was going to say the same thing. Again, my analysis is also stolen from Nate Silver over at 538. Great blog, by the way. And basically, he was saying that it's still possible, and a lot of it involves, him doing pretty dang well in the next few states, and also in California winning 40 of the 53 congressional districts. So, like, basically having a blowout in California as far as the congressional districts go. Just because each congressional district gets like 3 delegates or something. So he would be getting like 120 delegates in one sitting if he were able to do that. But otherwise, it was like most people were saying it's possible, but the odds now are what you said. He'll be a little bit short.
While you're talking on that turnout and voting, can I just throw in something about polling? Because just again, from my background, I think it's important to sometimes explain why what the polls are and the exit and the actual results can be different. Mm-hmm. There can be a lot of reasons for that. And one is that polls are usually surveys, should we say, polls going to the polling station. So let's say surveys are usually taken, in the days leading up to an election. So you've got a lot of variation. Even the ones like right the day before, you still have time for people to change their minds, right? And what I found in my research in the UK, when we talked to people about their voting experience, we had people who in our pre-election focus group said, I think I'm going to go vote for the Liberal Democrats, and that's where I'm leaning. Mm-hmm. And then when they got to the ballot box, and two were long-term conservative voters, one was a long-term labor voter, both said, yep, I think I'm going to go for Lib Dems. Got to the ballot box, and what they said was, I just couldn't put the mark next to the Liberal Democrats. Or I just, I saw the guys out there for the Conservative Party, and I thought, oh, they're never going to do it anyway, I'll just, vote Conservative. But so what people say that they're going to do to a survey company, they might do something different, and that introduces error into the results. And then there are things that people can just not want to tell someone, so they lie, or there can just be error in the sample. So when it comes down to Wisconsin, I think Ted Cruz did better than he had been projected to do. I think he was projected 10, he ended up with 13. If it's within the margin of error, technically for polling, that still counts. So just remember that. Yeah. If a result is within the margin of error of the most recent poll, technically that poll was within the margin of error. So it was as right as it had to be.
I think the Wisconsin polls were pretty spot on recently, but we've had a couple polling sessions that weren't that accurate. Iowa was one. Ted Cruz ended up winning Iowa, even though I think people were expecting him to come in second. And then what was the big Bernie upset? And was it Michigan?
Michigan.
So, I mean, the polling has been wrong at times. And I don't know if you've seen any data, but I have seen absolutely no data from California.
No.
And I also think that it will be a challenge to get data because California is a state that never matters in the primaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no past experience to know who turns out and who votes and how that all plays out. It's uncharted waters.
From what I remember, if I remember correctly from Chuck Todd, California is among a bunch of states on the very last day, June 7th. Is that right?
Yes, it is. I think California is. It's either last or like right before like Hawaii or something.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So the fact that Wisconsin never mattered before. I can't remember the last time this something as politically profound as sort of like Iowa and New Hampshire landed in my home state. It was so exciting. Yeah. But in terms of Wisconsin too, just wanted to point out that the reason why, again, with the links to the establishment, we should remember that Paul Ryan is from Wisconsin. Reince Priebus is from Wisconsin. So this establishment link, Walker, Ryan, Priebus, these guys have their party, they're firmly in the establishment camp. And we also know back from before the Tea Party, one of the things that used to characterize the Republican Party was that they would vote in lockstep. Mm-hmm. They use the power of, mass numbers and that groupthink, just to force those numbers, whereas Democrats have lots of different opinions, so it's easy to divide and conquer. Wisconsin Republicans are still in that, sort of Roman Legion funk.
Not only that, but those who were the stragglers behind the Legion, the conservatives on talk radio were also lined up against Trump. So it was the perfect storm to give him a hit. And
it was basically the hometown advantage for the establishment in Wisconsin.
It was the home state of the establishment. It was like they were their own candidate themselves, and they rallied around, ironically, the person who is also anti-establishment. Okay, so all right, if I can
Oh, by the way,
transition again.
Ripon, Wisconsin
Yeah.
claims to be the founding location is where the Republican Party was founded. So there's it's disputed, but obviously, go
It wasn't
Wisconsin.
Illinois? I always
See, this is
assumed
it. It's
Illinois.
disputed. It's disputed.
Okay, because the convention in 1860 was in Chicago, wasn't it? The one that
Well, no,
nominated.
there's like a little building that's about the size of like a one-room schoolhouse or school building that they used to have like back in Laura Ingalls Wilder days, kind of. And it's like this is the location of the first meeting of the Republican Party. So.
That's cool.
But that was like old school Bob LaFollette when they were progressives. They just called
Right.
themselves Republicans. Yeah.
Right. A different party. The Democrats are a different party as well. People get so offended at that, and you're like, dude, it's just the history books. Like neither party is what it used to be at all.
Yeah.
If you
Neither
if
is
you
a
make
phone.
it ideological, nothing's changed. But
Yeah.
like the North is still more progressive, and the South is still more conservative. But like the parties have switched. Like,
Yeah.
Anywho, sorry, that's off topic. Okay,
No,
so
I'm just it's getting dark here, so at some point I'm gonna have to mute myself and turn a light. But
okay.
I think that's everything that I had on my list.
Okay, I have a question for you. Actually, I have one piece of analysis so you can turn on your lights, and that is that I've seen both sides of the argument about Trump, and I just noticed it today, is that there are people out there that are saying if Trump wins the nomination, he puts lots and lots of states into play, lots of states that Democrats would think are safe states where there are vast majorities or higher percentages of white blue collar workers that might put states like Iowa into play and things like that. I've heard the other side of the argument, which says that, wow, if Trump's the nominee, then even places like Utah, where the Mormons absolutely hate him, those will be up in potentially places that the Republicans could lose. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum here, where basically analysis on both ends of the spectrum think, wow, if Trump's the nominee, we could have full-blown chaos on the electoral map. Do you have any opinion on any of that?
I just 2 words: gender gap.
Yeah, I think so. And then 30% of the electorate in 2012 was white without a college degree, and that is Trump's base. Not to say that all Trump voters are unintelligent, uneducated. It's not what I'm saying, but there is a tendency among blue collar workers to be supporting Trump, and a tendency among white people to be supporting Trump. And the states with that higher percentage might change things. Okay, and then my other question for you was, if you let's role play for a second. Let's say Christy Winters, you grew up in Alabama, all right, and you are now a conservative Republican, all right, and you are given the control of the Republican establishment, and you had the chance to knock Trump down. Let's say he gets 12-30. Yeah, he's 7 delegates off. What would you do? And you have you can just flip a switch and you can nominate somebody else, or you can just let Cruz come on or Trump come on. What would you do?
So as a Republican, what do I think would be the best outcome for my party?
Yes.
And I'm not evading, I'm trying to get clarification. Am I looking at the 2016 election, or am I looking at the party going forward?
The party going forward.
I think in that case, what my advice would be, I couldn't do it myself, but I could advise someone, would be to go with Cruz.
Now.
Go with Cruz.
Yeah?
Because he is, the establishment hate him now, but he will need the RNC data. He will need the endorsements. He will need the legitimacy of all of those Republicans who currently can't stand him. He can't be a candidate who goes to a state and Scott Walker won't go and meet with him. He can't be that candidate. So he's going to actually be, I think, not in a more powerful situation, but in a more dependent situation as the nominee to be controlled by the establishment, because he owes Scott Walker in Wisconsin now. He owes him big time. And if he has to owe all these people, so I think from the establishment's point of view, if their long-term concern is the party, they can have a not disastrous campaign with Cruz and promise him something farther down the road, or bring him into the fold, or give him some kind of role that he wants. But Trump is just a loose cannon.
Do you not think that Cruz could be worse than Trump for the Republicans?
Not in the long term.
No.
No, because
he's a Barry Goldwater. He's a one and done kind of loser.
No, he's got deep roots. Well, we'll see how how much he would go down. But here's the thing: is he can stay on message. He can, he's articulate. He can make a point. He can play debate tricks on the debate stage in the presidential debate arena, I think. And so he's far more dangerous. I mean, people will turn in, if Trump is at the presidential debate level, people are going to be turning in for a train wreck. They're not going to be turning in to learn about what the next, Republican candidate for president has to say on things like my student loan debt that I'm going to be paying off till I'm 65. That's not going to happen.
It's true, and Cruz has been able to, for the most part, fly under the radar of probably mainstream people. Like most, you go and like ask a guy on the street, like, what do you think of Trump? You're going to get a reaction. You go, what do you think of Cruz? There's a good chance they're going to be like, I don't really know much. He's like a conservative, right? And
green eggs and ham, right?
Yeah, they don't know. And so I think that's an interesting point. I'm torn because
give me your assessment.
So I'm a little Jekyll and Hyde on this one because I'm sympathetic to your argument. Like, let Cruz sneak it out. There's still risk in that. Trump might say that's not fair, lying Ted, and run as a third party, which throws a wrench in all of that. But assuming, like, leaving that aside, I think your logic is sound. But there's another part of me that says if I was the Republican Party, I'd want to go down with like in a blaze of glory. Like say,
that's the Trump voter. That's like, the Trump voter.
This, like either we're going out with Trump or I'm gonna install like the course of Ronald Reagan. Like I'm gonna pull some like Paul Ryan or John Kasich, like really just say like no. Like this party is gonna like stand on its principles and we're gonna go out like fighting and like with flipping the bird to everybody. That's my Jekyll and Hyde here. Like either the establishment should like grow a pair and do it and like say like no, like hit the nuclear button and say no, or they should do the opposite and say like let's let Trump do his damage so that everybody can learn what a bad idea this was.
Let Trump be Trump.
Yeah, like let's let him destroy everything so that when 4 years from now there's not an even bigger retaliation.
The biggest criticism that the establishment has often faced is that they get these middle of the road, mushy candidates who aren't conservative enough, as you say. Now, some conservatives would say that Trump's not a conservative, but it does make the case that if you give the people what they want, and then it blows up in their face, will people just be like, oh, that was my fault? Or, remember how everybody thought going into Iraq was a really good idea? Mm-hmm. And then several years later, everyone's like, going into Iraq was a terrible idea. What were they thinking?
Yeah. You're not patriotic if you don't have a yellow ribbon on your tree.
Yeah. If you oppose invading another country, you're liberal scum. I mean, I remember that because I lived in Madison and there were counter marches and but in
2004 I was 14, 15. Yeah, I was 14 in 2004. So that means in 2003 I was 12 or 13. And actually I was I was politically aware, but I was just getting into it. And I think I just kind of followed what my dad's side of the family was, and they were all conservative. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. Like look at those hippies protesting the war. I was 12. I can be forgiven.
Of course.
Anywho, I think that one last thing that might be a nice segue to our next conversation is that I bet the Republicans right now are wishing they had superdelegates.
Oh, I wish, they do. They're looking over with convention rule envy at the delegate structure in the Democratic Party.
This is what the superdelegates were kind of designed to stop.
And some outsider coming in taking over the party.
Yeah, like it's to stop what is it that they put in Federalist Number 10 by James Madison, like the winds of the emotional populace. Like the emotions have to be overridden by somebody. We can't have a pure democracy. Are we crazy?
And we don't have a pure democracy. I mean, the founders did not give us a pure democracy. We can go through it really quick as a civics lesson, right? There was not a direct election of U.S. senators. Each state representative or state house would send 2 members from that state to represent it in the Senate. So we had to amend the Constitution to get the direct election of senators. We've had to expand the vote because initially it was only propertied white males. So we've had to work that way. And of course, the more famous one that we're all left with is the Electoral College, where you're not directly, it's not by a popular vote, but it's, again, a situation where people go and cast votes on behalf of someone else, but there could be shenanigans. So
there could be. There are shenanigans. There was man, it's been 16 years, but there were shenanigans in 2000.
Oh yes, there
with,
were shenanigans.
the Bush Gore shenanigans, and I think even most like unbiased observers can look back now and say, "Wow, those are some serious shenanigans." Maybe some of the people would have some choicier, aggressive words, but shenanigans is the bare minimum, I think.
Right, for a family-friendly show.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have lots of kids watching right now.
So are superdelegates a good thing?
No.
So you want to do the segue? Pitch your video.
Yeah. Well, for anybody who doesn't know who I am, who might be watching, I run a channel called Political Junkie News. Check me out after this stream is over, and I have a new video out called "What are superdelegates and how do we get rid of them?" And I basically come up with this thesis: is that the superdelegates were brought into the party in the 80s, and it was because of a string of like losing Democratic candidates that the people were choosing. And so the party establishment decided that they wanted to have these like party officials, these congressmen, these senators, these former presidents have a vote as a delegate and have it not be tied to the voters, so that in the case that there's a crazy, let's say the Democratic version of Trump, the party elites could come in and say, no, 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 we're tipping the scales here, 20%, 15%. We're going to give it to an establishment person who we think can win. And I make the argument, of course, that it's undemocratic. I think most people can see that pretty clearly, that it's not purely like democracy in action. I think that even if you think there's a good reason to have superdelegates, you can see that that's the case. And then two, it's not representative. So in 2008, 28% of the Democratic Party vote was roughly from white men, but it made up over 50% of the superdelegates. So, and that makes sense because most of the congressmen and presidents have been white men as well. So I just make the argument that even though the Democratic Party is a private institution, they're allowed to have superdelegates. They can have them, and as long as no one's putting up a fuss, they probably will. But we could change that. And so at the very end of my video, I say, in 2008, Barack Obama's campaign manager, I forgot his name now, it's slipping from me, but he chaired a committee recommended to the DNC that they bind superdelegates to the popular vote in the state. And that was ignored by the executive committee of the DNC. And to amend the charter of the Democratic Party, it takes a majority vote of all the delegates present at the convention and a subsequent majority vote of the DNC. Totally feasible and something that we could all work together to push through if it was important to us. Like Bernie people, Hillary Clinton people, if we just want a more Democratic Party, then it's something that we could do. And so that's kind of where my video went, and that's kind of how I would start the discussion for us about superdelegates.
Right, that's good. So just on the point about this idea of, we're coming back to the idea of democratic legitimacy. Mm-hmm. Now, for people who've not done comparative politics, I'm going to bring up the situation in the United Kingdom, because how they get their representatives might be kind of surprising for Americans who aren't familiar with their political system. The parties are very much a top-down sort of situation, and there is a committee, whether there's so that's top-down national, the national parties have a lot of power, and then you have local committees as well. And actually for they have a concept called parachuting a candidate, where if you have somebody in the cabinet, say David Cameron has someone that is he wants to make sure is in the next government, he'll just send that person to run in a seat. Like it would be like Barack Obama, if Nancy Pelosi wanted to have somebody run and just go into putting them in California where they were in a safe seat, and then you just go and represent those people. Or you might have a situation where local party committees interview candidates who interview for the opportunity to represent them, and then they have a little selection committee, and then those that person is put forward to represent that community. They don't even necessarily have to live there. So this idea that your representative, that party people have to be elected, is a quite sort of American thing. I don't know how many other countries sort of have primaries the way we do, but certainly no one says British democracy is a failure because of how they select their representatives or anything like that. So as an extreme, I just want to kind of put it up that just because when we come to government, and when citizens under the law are, want to see representation in an institution that has power over them, as you pointed out, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Green Party, Socialist parties, these are private organizations that have long-term interests.
Right.
And obviously, as we just pointed out, the Republicans now wish they had superdelegates because an outside person, interloper, who was identified as a Republican, given a lot of money as a Republican, but isn't really committed to the party, is now taking on a moniker of the party and trying to speak in its name. And a lot of those people don't think the party, it stands for what is coming out of Donald Trump's mouth.
You're right.
So I understand why superdelegates. So I should also declare, I don't have a position on this. So I told Will that I would argue sort of the devil's advocate position in order to have a more interesting conversation. But I myself don't have a firm opinion about superdelegates. I see the pros and cons, but I'm practicing my debate here by trying to make a good argument on the spur of the moment on some principles that I'm familiar with. So I think in terms of, again, the preservation of the institution for not just that candidate, that one presidential candidate in that 1 year, but the reputation of the people around who are also associated with it, that the party itself has I don't want to say like a fiduciary responsibility, but like a duty of care to make sure that the party, the core values are actually being represented in the candidate who is standing with their name next to it.
Okay. I guess you make a good argument. If the Republican Party right now,
as did you, by the way.
If the Republican Party right now had superdelegates and overturned a Trump plurality or even majority of the delegates, I don't know if it would make a difference because they would be in the same kind of terrible situation where they're risking tearing the whole party apart. So I wonder and then the same thing with the Democrats in 2008. Barack Obama won a majority of the delegates, and so the superdelegates all just like jumped ship on Hillary and went to Barack. So on the Democratic side, you can see that there's the superdelegates are pretty much aware that they need to go with the flow or they're going to have a problem at some point. And it looks like on the Republican side, if they were to have superdelegates and pick a fight, that they would be in a losing situation. And so I saw a really good analysis and comparison today about the superdelegates. This person said that superdelegates are like the Democratic Party appendix. That they don't do anything. And the only time they would do anything, everything's already lost anyway. That is to say that if they're in the situation where they need the superdelegates, it's already lost. Like they're already going to lose the general election. They're already in a place where they're up against their own voters and they're effed. So it's one of those things where I just think you're right that in England they do. The party just says here's your representative for your county. Enjoy. I just think that since we are in the American system, I kind of like our primaries. They're a little bit too long, but if they can be more democratic, then great. Because any other situation would probably be chaos anyway.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've learned the most, maybe it's because it's important this time around, but I really didn't understand a lot about the inner workings of the conventions and how the process of this rulemaking and the various ways that you go about getting delegates and what delegates can do, what they can't do, what they have to do, and unbound delegates and bound delegates and states that don't have bound delegates and other states that, all these kind of rules. And it's been a very interesting sort of from political science point of view of looking at how political organization, it's almost in some ways so flexible and dynamic that it created these problems, as we pointed out. But it's a really unique thing in that it's seeking to put up candidates to represent people, but ultimately it's accountable to the people who make it up. So it's a really bizarre kind of institution.
It is a bizarre institution, but I think that the evolution of the Democratic primary process and the Republican primary process from one that was maybe like in England, King Caucus, people in back rooms, party bosses, what's his face from New York, the party boss like making deals and picking candidates. That was also just a wholly irresponsible way to do it. And so the reforms that came after the 1968 Democratic National Convention, after all the violence, to bring in open participation. What's good for the goose is in theory also good for the gander, because these parties became more inclusive and grew. People saw themselves as part of the party. And if the party were to ever actually go against the will of the voters, like the Republicans might do, they're going to feel the wrath of at least a good chunk of their base. And so
On
I
a,
think, yeah, these bizarre institutions have evolved this way, and I think that it's been a good development overall.
on a related but also distinct tangent, I wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
Using the same sort of premises that we're generating here about the role of superdelegates and democratic legitimacy, what are your views on open and closed primaries?
Okay, let me give you that. And let me give you one little detail before then. One little thing I really want to say about this is that I hate the idea that either candidate on the Democratic side could use the superdelegates to like usurp the popular vote. Like
I agree.
I just want to make that clear. Like I didn't like it when the media covers the superdelegates for Clinton, even though she hasn't like won a majority of the pledged delegates yet. Just like I didn't like it in 2008 when they did the same thing. I also find it really annoying that Bernie Sanders is now trying to like game theory his way to getting more superdelegates. It's all stupid. That's why I think they need to go. To answer your question about open and closed primaries, I actually think the system, for once, I think it's perfect just like it is. That some places are closed and some places are open.
I'm skeptical. Go on.
That I understand that the idea of having a closed primary like excludes people, and that in an ideal situation, the party should be like spreading their arms out and like welcoming in as many people who want to participate as possible. So I see the value in some of those states having those open primaries. In some cases, I think, yeah, like the party should be a little bit more closed off and like make sure that the people who are really dedicated get to have their voice heard. Am I way off the mark here?
Well, I think it's just saying, well, the reason why I was skeptical is because it's about equity. So
Right.
in Wisconsin, we have an open primary system, and you don't have to declare what party you're supporting. So it drives people who come in from outside of Wisconsin, where you get lists of people by their parties and everything.
Right.
It drives those people nuts coming to do field work in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Because
Messes with the
anybody can
data.
vote. Yeah, anyone can vote, and
Mhm.
anyone can be anything, and you don't have to declare. There's no 30 days before the election.
So it's like New
Last,
Hampshire. You register and vote on the same day.
you can, yeah.
Mm.
Well, yeah, you can do, yeah, that's what I was like in college, like helping organize to get students registered for same-day registration, yeah. Yeah, and then that has, I think, at least the positive side of maybe moderating the extreme parts of both sides of a party, you know, both political spectrums. Because if the Republicans had more open, you know, primaries, they might have had more opportunities for more moderate mainstream candidates, not just limiting to the people who have to choose, do I want to vote tactically in the next election, because I don't, you know, or register 30 days in advance or do all these kinds of things. So I know that it's annoying for people who like to know already coming to your house if, you know, you're registered as a Democrat.
Yeah.
But I do think that the open primary system, if you're not going to have like party memberships where you have to vote, you know, like you have to pay to be a member or something, then
Yeah.
why do some people, yeah, just to flip back and forth or get locked into one party when they want to switch? Yeah, I just think if you're going to have those primaries to get the best candidate for your party, then the best way to do that is to open it up to everybody. And Sanders actually really benefits from those open primaries because a lot of people who haven't been, you know, wouldn't necessarily be members of the Democratic Party have been able to just go on the day and vote. So.
No, you're right. And I think it's also ironic that I started this conversation off as the guy who's like, hey, get rid of these super delegates. We need more open democracy. And then immediately said, let's close the primaries off and make sure these a-holes can't come in and vote. I better change my opinion right now before this call is over. Yeah.
But you know what I meant? This is actually a fantastic moment of realizing cognitive dissonance, which is kind of what I wanted to ask the question, because I want to know how your logic would follow. And then when you went, well, let's have it every way. I went,
No, you're totally right. I decided, like, when you asked the question, I was like, I'm going to take a strong position because that's more interesting for the viewers. And then I was like, oh man, I've said that now. that was a Trump moment for sure for me. No, it's a good point. And I think that like I said earlier, the party should be, it's in the best interest of the party to bring in as many people as possible. So as long as people aren't like getting their voter registration card stamped Democrat and then running over to the Republican booth and doing the same thing, so they have like this weird donkey elephant hybrid stamped on their passport, then we're good. Like, I think they should, yeah, as long as you're voting once, let's have everything be open. You're totally right. I concede.
So, and also for people who are worried about shenanigans, I can't give you a lot of evidence. I give you one anecdotal evidence, which was also, I'll date myself. Pat Buchanan was running in the Republican primary, and Bill Clinton was running unopposed because he was running for re-election. And I had told myself and everyone that I was going to vote for Pat Buchanan because I wanted to vote for the most extreme Republican, to try to get the most extreme candidate in. And when I went up to the ballot, I just physically couldn't do it.
Dude, I
So,
was about to ask, how did you, did you take a vomit bag with you? How did you manage that?
and this is why, I understood a lot when the voters who said, oh, I've always voted Labor or I've always voted Conservative, and so I just did it again. There is that sort of in cognitive consistency, this idea that we want to, your moment of cognitive dissonance. I said X, but then I said Y. There's a conflict here.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think if you've been a long-term member of a party like I have, there's not just an intellectual connection about tactical voting, but there's an affective emotion of like rooting for a sports team or wanting, the United States to do well in the World Cup or something.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't get, that's a really hard step to get over.
It is.
So this idea of voter fraud and people playing in other people's primaries, there might be a little of that, but in all honesty, there are probably more people who spoil their ballots by writing in Mickey Mouse than there are people who are tactically voting, like I wanted to, but couldn't bring myself to do in the end.
Tactically voting for a Disney character. I get it. I see their end game.
Yes.
I was going to say that the reason I enjoy talking with people like you or my cousin who's far more conservative than both of us is that sometimes when you're just talking these things out in long form, you really do find like these giant holes in your perspective, in your argument, in your opinions. And so right there with the open closed primaries and the superdelegates, or the example I was bringing up with my cousin is pork barrel spending, putting like pet projects into bills. And I used to think, well, if you got to do that to get a bill passed, if it's good enough for LBJ and his legislative achievements, it's good enough for today. And my cousin said, well, yeah, but just think ethically, why would you put money for a bridge into a bill about education? And I thought, wow, that makes 100% sense. Like, just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we have to. It's those challenging your perspective is so valuable. And that's why I enjoy our conversations.
Likewise. Oder gleichfalls.
Gleichfalls. Oh, very nice, very nice.
Ja, aber ich wohne in Köln, so ich sage ich, yeah.
Yeah,
ich here in Cologne.
I started off ich.
Yeah.
By the way, for anyone who's watching, we're talking about German here.
We didn't go over.
It's like we're not all super aggressive, damn it. Like we don't all say ich. I'm like, okay, sorry. Cool. Do we want to talk about VPs or save it for next time?
Well, I've got at 2 minutes before 9. So if we wrap it up here, it wraps up naturally. The only thing I was going to throw out, just if we wanted to close it up, I had one other thing that I would throw out that we could do quite short. So should we put that on our VPs?
Yeah, let's tease the V's. Like let's make that the title for the next hangout. That's good. That's good meaty clickbaity stuff, right? VPs.
Yes. Excellent. And then when that video comes out, I'll put it in the card. So linking to the VP video so that they can go right from this one to that one. It's all about cross-marketing.
There you go.
Tagging into more content. Whoosh.
Oh, that reminds me. I have something to tell you after we go off air, but yeah. What did you want to talk about as our last little duty thing here? Yeah,
so when I talked about the issue of Trump's electability, I threw out gender gap, but that encompassed a lot of the ways that the gender gap itself reflects other nexuses and points of intersectionality, like African American women are far more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate than white women. And then, older women, younger women, these kinds of things. But the reason, Donald Trump had a terrible week leading up to his Wisconsin vote. And he really has this Achilles heel with women. Mm-hmm. That is a problem for him, and I don't see how it's not a problem for him, because I think it's fundamentally part of his worldview and how he sees women. Whether he's talking about his daughter being attractive, he talked about, I just saw something on Lawrence O'Donnell's The Last Word, where he was talking about his baby girl that had just been born, and said, oh, does she take after you or she take after Marla? And he said, well, she's got Marla's legs, but I don't know if she's got Marla's. We'll have to wait and see. That's his infant daughter. He's talking about her breasts. It's just like...
And just for anyone out there who'd be like, oh, you PC regressives or whatever, it's not it's just about being a decent person. Like, what the heck? Like, what is wrong with him? That's one of those things you just look at it and you say, it doesn't matter who you are. That's just, everyone should revile that. Oh my gosh. I never heard that before.
Yeah,
I heard the Ivanka thing where he's like, yeah, if she wasn't my daughter, you know. Never the baby thing. That's new.
Yeah, I'll tweet that out for you if you want.
Oh.
But yeah, I think it's just it's going to be his Achilles heel, and he's going to get killed in the suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. He's not doing well with women. Going back to all the way to the start here, his hatred from Hispanics is strong as well,
Oh yes,
rightfully
yes.
so. And I assume, I haven't seen the numbers. I'm sure he's doing horrible with black voters. I'm sure, like,
Yeah, you
he's
can go down
doing
the
well.
line.
He's not even doing well with Republicans, if you think about it. He's really not. Like, I mean, most Republicans aren't voting for Trump. Like, nobody except for this small little group, this little plurality in the Republican Party likes him. And he's 99% positive he's gonna get creamed if he is indeed the nominee.
Yeah, I mean, his core base is, with the comments he made about Black Lives Matter and other things, Hispanic Americans, as you said, the whole issue about anchor babies, which I think in terms of like Asian Americans, Jeb Bush messed that one up more, if you can believe it. But there is definitely this insider-outsider, and the insiders are certain kinds of white men, really. And then sometimes some white women too. I think the gender gap in Wisconsin wasn't quite as big. I haven't seen the numbers on the gender gap in the Republican Party for who voted for whom, but someone said it wasn't so big. But you can't get elected as president of the United States just counting on white men, because not all the white men are going to vote for you.
It's not 1824. You ain't Andrew Jackson. You can't do it that way.
Yep.
Yo, you're totally right. And just like one little thing, this will be my final point, but like, this isn't just like, Mitt Romney didn't do very well with Hispanics or black people either. And it's not just because he went to like a black neighborhood and sang Who Lets the Dog Out horribly, like Mitt Romney did, Like, you might look at Mitt Romney and say, wow, he's not doing well with that voting demographic. And you might say there's policy reasons behind that. But maybe you believe, like I do, that Mitt Romney in his core is not a bad person. Like, I don't think Mitt Romney's a horrible person. With Donald Trump, I look at him and I just see a toxic human being. And I think it like that aspect of it is not mathematically tangible at this point, aside from the likability numbers. But that is a dynamic of American politics that's incredibly important. Is, what do you feel deep down? Like, what is your gut feeling? And with Donald Trump, I think the vast majority of people are going to say, no, 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 no. And I know that, like, maybe that's like the obvious thing to say, but it's a really important thing to say, is that, liberals are freaking out right now about Trump, and rightfully so. He's a wild man. He's a wild card. But in the end, the fundamentals aren't there for him.
But on your point, which you brought up as the counter to my Ted Cruz candidacy strategy, if Donald Trump feels like this election has been stolen from him by the Republican establishment, he's not going to go away after the convention. He's not.
And then that's where we're headed. That's where we are headed. There's no if the numbers are true and Donald Trump doesn't get 1237 and he's just a little bit short, even if it's 200 delegates, he's still got the most by far. And the idea that they're just gonna like play by the rules and take it away from him and he's just gonna go back to Trump Mansion and make YouTube videos again, never gonna happen.
Yeah, the post-Trump election story is going to be, in some ways, I think, as interesting as it can't be as interesting as the election, but it'll still be fascinating to watch.
It'll be fascinating to see what, like, I hate to do this already, but like 2020, what's going to happen? Like, can it get worse? Are they going to come back and like recover? Who knows? That speculation will have to wait till December when the election's passed.
No, like 5 minutes after the announcement of who won in November, then we'll be thinking about 2020.
We'll already be doing it. I can't wait. I'll hopefully get the election night hangout set up and we can speculate about 2020.
It'd be fantastic. Yes, and have like special guests drop in because we'll be up all night and try to do something that would be amazing. All right, so for the rest of you, we're going to have a little chat off air, but we're going to wrap this up here because it seems like a natural place to close, and we've gone for about an hour. So thank you, Will, for coming on to the channel again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Go to his channel, sub him if you haven't. If you haven't, why haven't you? You see how awesome he is. See how much fun we have. You can have this kind of fun with Will on his channel as well. And then, so Will's been awesome. You've been awesome. I guess the only person that's left is me, and I'm always awesome. So thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.